goes on, it'll go blue, and then it's live.
Okay.
And then once you finish, just like it a lot.
Now I'm not wearing like guy clothes that have belt hooks and stuff.
Go
So
in a pocket, or if you go,
women's clothes don't have pockets. It's a terrible thing.
there's all of it. You think you can clip too? Well, if you're not moving too far, you can even just leave it right on the table.
Well, how about if we, no, that's good. If we put it here, no, it's gonna, oh look, I have an idea. What if?
Right to the
Yep.
jacket.
Mm-hmm.
Just like that. Yeah, go this side up.
What?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Is that right, or does it have to be other side up? No, that's
this
right.
side's the mic. Do you mind just push it a little bit higher up?
Even more?
Yeah, a little more. That's probably good. Within about 6 inches what you want.
Okay.
So I think that's gonna be
Do you want me to do a test?
Yes, I'm gonna head up in a sec. Sam, the guy up there, on
Mm-hmm.
the computer, he's our director. So I'll have him do a test. I'll give you a
Okay.
As for that, that can go.
Right, but I need
This
to.
can be it.
I need to do. Oh, it is on.
It's on. To mute it, it'll switch to the top. That
Yes.
just turns it off. When you put it back on, it's gonna auto connect. That's all.
Cool. All right, so I'll just go testing, testing, testing. You give me the high sign when I'm going to do it.
I'll give you a look in a second. But,
Thank you.
Any other questions I can help you with last minute?
No, I think we're good. I just have to like click there, but this is the best setup I think we could have achieved with this. So thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Happy to help.
No, Mac is just so much better, like so much better.
I'm with you. I have a Mac.
So, Keynote is like an order of magnitude better. So,
I just got a Mac. I just got a MacBook on 4. The silicon chips is amazing. I love it.
nice.
I'll put this mic right in.
Okay, and is that what Barbara's going to use? Okay. All right, so let's do the test, and then I can move over there while she does the introduction.
That looks fine. Go ahead.
testing, testing. How are we doing? Can you hear me in the back row? Is the mic working? I see some thumbs up over there and not over there. Oh. So I need to, is this a different mic? No, that's a light. Yes, Mary. No, I'm just wanting to make sure you're okay. Hey, I haven't been a professor for decades if I can't reach the back row, right? So if at any point I forget and the volume goes down, just wave and I'll know what it's about, okay? Cool.
There is a way to patch that the way with the speakers in the auditorium. I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
Well, if we could do that, that would be incredibly great. They're trying to get this mic to go through the speakers in the auditorium, which would be better.
Okay.
But we'll see. If not, I will just... There always are. That's why I wanted to come down when I came down, because there's always technical issues. It's just like, that's part of the deal.
Yes,
It's no big deal.
Good.
Well, we've made progress, but we're trying to get this mic to patch into the speakers here, and we haven't figured that out. That's not... Well, so far this is just for the live stream, but we would like to have it be not...
We could also use the handheld. Where's the handheld?
But I...
We do have a handheld mic somewhere. It wasn't here.
Yeah, Barbara's going to use that. But I don't really want dueling mics. I'm not sure that's a great look. Sweet, thank you.
I can't remember what we did last time. Unless there is a, let me look around. Is that or something? Yeah.
Hey, Mike, stop. Look.
Everything okay then?
I'm not sure.
We're trying to get the lavalier mic to go through the auditorium speakers.
Yeah, you just got to turn the gain up.
Wait, is it doing it? Listen, I think it might be doing it now.
Yeah, it's going.
You have the magic touch.
Mike, it's not working. What I did, but I'm not going to touch it again. Thank you so much for your time. No worries. Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, so I think it's working, right? I wasn't going to introduce you, Barbara.
Yeah, yes. So that you don't be standing, watch me trip over my stuff and land right in your face.
Which I have left untidily all over the floor.
I can put your stuff somewhere else if you want. Would that be easier?
Sure, you want to put it just in the
I'll
front
just put it
row
in
or
the front row
something?
with mine.
Thank you.
So for me, I also have to read my thing, so I can go here.
Totally. Here, you know what?
I have mine printed that big because I can't.
I will take this out of your way. And mic is hot because I don't want to turn it off now that they figured out how to make it work.
So, but I'm using that.
also very loud.
I'm Dr. Martin. I'm the chair of the history department, and tonight's Sinistat lecture will first be introduced by Barbara Karras, who is the daughter of Sig Sinistat, who this lecture is named after. So she will be doing the introduction. So here she is.
Thank you very much.
Is it on? Yikes. Okay. How's that? Is that a little too loud? Are you okay? All right? Okay. As Dr. Martin mentioned, my name is Barbara Sinisvet Karras, and it is my privilege to represent the Sinisvet family at this year's lecture. On behalf of the family, I would like to thank Dr. Morag Martin and the History Department, as well as donors past and present who have made this series possible. I would also like to welcome all of those in attendance tonight, including those online, and with special thank you to the journalism and broadcasting students who are making the live stream happen. I'm going to speak a bit about my father, and I will also be introducing Dr. Mary Fissel. And I promise to be brief. I've timed it. It's 5 minutes. Sig Sinisvet was born in 1924 into a small religious community in Bernathen, Pennsylvania. He was 17 years old in 1941 when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and Congress declared war. Soon afterwards, he hopped the local commuter train to Philadelphia, lied about his age, and enlisted in the U.S. Navy. He served in the South Pacific till the war was over in 1945. He and my mother, Nadine Smith, married in 1947. Taking advantage of the GI Bill, he earned his BA and MA degrees in history from Michigan State University. After this, my parents moved back to Pennsylvania, where Dad taught high school and earned his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, with 4 kids running around. In 1968, we moved here to Brockport for Dad's new teaching job. This was the 60s, a turbulent decade. At SUNY Brockport, Dad's love for history and his commitment to civil rights and social justice flourished. Thanks to excellence in staffing and a strong esprit de corps, the history department grew and thrived. As department chair, he worked to create the brand new Department of African American Studies in 1972, he wrote and published a book called The White Response to Black Emancipation that addressed race relations in the United States since Reconstruction. A popular course he taught by that name introduced undergraduate students here at Brockport to the topic. Tragically, Dad's life was cut short in 1977 at age 52. In response, his colleagues established a lecture that would reflect his concern and interest in deepening our understanding of the nature of race relations and in advancing the cause of human equality, community, and solidarity. That is quoted from the statement of purpose for the lecture. The lecture has been presented biennially for 48 years. Last March, I heard Dr. Fissel discussing her new book with Danielle Moody on the Daily Beast podcast, and I was inspired to propose that she be this year's speaker. Her book, Pushback, the 2,500-year fight to thwart women, by restricting abortion resonates strongly in this political moment with the striking down of Roe v. Wade and the resulting bans and restrictions across the country. Inevitably, women in disadvantaged groups are being disproportionately harmed. Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, and low-income women are paying the greatest price for not being able to secure the reproductive health care they need. Yet lack of access to safe and effective health care is nothing new in history, as her research reveals in detail. Dr. Fissel is the inaugural J. Mario Molina Professor of History of Medicine at Johns Hopkins University. Her research has focused on how social factors influence the practice and outcomes of science and medicine. Her decades of experience as professor of early modern science and medicine make her uniquely qualified to help us understand the pregnancy predicament throughout history and up to the present moment. Reproduction affects us all. Access or lack of access to reproductive health impacts society in a myriad of ways at every level. We look forward to hearing how we can push back. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Mary Fissel, and also to let you know that the book will be available at the Liftbridge bookstore. We were unable to get books here tonight for a book signing, regrettably, and it's also available online. Thank you all very much for being here, and welcome to Dr. Fissel.
That was lovely, thank you. I'm really touched. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you so much, everybody here, for inviting me to share my work with you. It's a genuine pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be giving the 2025 SIG Sinist Fet Lecture, endowed as a memorial to a pioneering anti-racist scholar. And I love this picture. It's him with his daughters, Nancy and Barbara. Really lovely picture. At the Rose Cabin at that. Now, before I begin, I want to offer a little bit of a content alert. I'll be talking about sensitive topics, including miscarriage and coerced abortion. If any of this is triggering for you, please don't hesitate to slip out. Come back for the reception if you want. Take care of yourself first. I'd like to start with a story. It's 1651, and we're in Maryland, in St. Mary's City. At that point, a very new settlement. This is John Speed's 1676 map. It's sideways to the way we think of the Chesapeake. How's that? That looks like what you know. And here's St. Mary's City, right where the Potomac begins to empty into the Chesapeake. And city is like aspirational at this point. It's a village. A young woman named Susanna Warren was scared. She was newly arrived in Maryland that year, and her lover, William Mitchell, had forced her to take a horrible medicine. It smelled so nasty that her servant, Martha, had refused to take it out of Mitchell's pillbox or even touch it at all. Mitchell told Martha to poach an egg, and then he put the pill inside the egg. He pinched Susanna's nose until she opened her mouth to breathe, and he slid the egg with the medicine in it down her throat. Over the next few days, it caused terrible griping pains and a lot of purging. Susanna thought she was going to die. After 2 or 3 days of this, Mitchell assured her that the medicine had frighted it away, meaning she was no longer pregnant. Susanna and William had become involved the year before in London. Warren was a 20-year-old widow whose husband Humphrey had died recently. Mitchell was a lot older, 45, and he was married, although he kept promising Susanna that he would marry her when he could. His wife was subject to alarming fainting fits, like for an hour or 2 at a time, so maybe Susanna had some reason to believe him. In London, in late winter 1651, all three, Mitchell, his wife, and his lover, boarded a ship for America. Supposedly, his wife died on the voyage over. I think William Mitchell was a rogue. He borrowed money from Susanna to pay for the passage over, and then tried to claim that she was his indentured servant. Not nice. There's a lot more of this story I want to share with you, but let me offer a little context first. I came across this case in my research for the book I've written on the long history of abortion, Antiquity to Antibiotics. It's out now from Hearst in the UK, Basic Books in the US. Same book, different presses, different titles, different covers. That's how they do it. Same book. Understanding this very long history over millennia can afford us perspective that our troubled times make it hard to find. Big picture, my book argues that the long view, Antiquity to Antibiotics, shows us that women have always ended pregnancies for as far back in the written record as we can see. And prohibiting the practice rarely works. It just makes abortion more difficult and dangerous. This theme connects to Sig Sinisvet's work because it employs the analytic of reproductive justice, pioneered by a Black women's collective, Sister Song, that understands that access to reproductive care is an issue of social and racialized inequalities. Women of color and poorer women will struggle to obtain care in a way that their richer white sisters simply will not experience. This long history is marked by outbreaks of repression, rather like what we're living in today in the US. But these moments of intensity alternate with much longer times of toleration. It may be forbidden or illegal, but people look away. They refuse to ask the obvious questions. They ignore the evidence that women are regulating their fertility. And these flashpoints of repression are often forms of gender backlash. Times when women have in some ways gained some measures of autonomy, and then conservative interests try to pull the arc of history back again. While abortion restrictions encoded concerns about women's social roles, what was wrong, and I use scare quotes, about abortion has varied tremendously over time. Today's anti-abortion activists focus on what they call innocent unborn life. But for most of the past 2 millennia, the fetus was not the center of concerns about abortion. So, I've been working on untangling this Maryland case, because it's quite complicated in the records, for quite some time when I discovered to my surprise that it was cited in Dobbs, the 2022 Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade and almost 50 years of legal abortion provision in the US. In Samuel Alito's decision, he claimed this case as a piece of evidence for the idea that Americans and their English ancestors, from whom they got so much of their law, had always considered abortion unacceptable and therefore criminalized it. Alito drew on the work of Joseph Della Penna, an environmental historian who wrote a tome, and it is a tome, on abortion in America, a work that has been much criticized by historians who study gender, sex, and medicine. There was no statute that forbade abortion in English law until 1803. So 1651 Maryland, that's not going on. And it appeared in court extremely rarely. I'll talk more about that. So in my talk tonight, I'm going to look further at this case, contextualize it with other cases to address the question, what did abortion mean in early modern England and the American colonies? What does it look like on the ground? A few caveats before we get back to the Eastern Shore in Maryland. First, tonight I'll be talking about free people living in early America. Those who were enslaved have a different, powerfully significant story about the meanings of abortion that I address in the book but won't be doing this evening. Second, I refer to the people seeking to end a pregnancy in early modern England and early America as women. Of course, today I would be referring to such as people because we know the world is more complicated than a simple male-female binary can really imply. However, one of my arguments is that abortion restriction is often gender backlash. In the pre-modern world, it is significant that it was those understood as women who got pregnant and sought abortions. So women. Okay, let's get back to Mitchell and Warren in Maryland. Shortly after the poached egg episode, Mitchell sailed back across the Atlantic for business interests. I think it's in the Netherlands. Warren believed she was no longer pregnant. When the local midwife, Mary Clocker, asked if she were pregnant, Warren replied flippantly that if she were with child, it was the doing of the Holy Spirit, not any man. Unfortunately for Warren, Clocker knew better. Warren was still pregnant and had to petition the local court for financial support from Mitchell's estates while she waited to deliver her baby. Support was quickly granted. Mitchell was a powerful man, connected to Lord Baltimore, the proprietor of the colony, and he and Warren had not been discreet about their relationship. When Warren went into labor, Clocker was her midwife, and she interrogated her about the father of her child. Midwives were routinely instructed to ask unwed mothers about paternity during labor, because it was assumed with the pains and potential for dying, they would speak the truth. Then local authorities would be able to collect the child support. Warren named Mitchell and also told Clocker about the attempted abortion. Her baby was stillborn or died shortly after birth. When William Mitchell returned to Maryland many months later, Warren assured him that the child had been his. She not unreasonably thought finally they were going to get married. But Mitchell had already started a relationship with another woman named Joan Toast. And I actually think it's this other relationship, this new one, that may have prompted the court case from which I have excavated this story. It was a woman too far, if you will, for locals. Before I get to the courtroom drama, I want to introduce the other case I'll focus on. Big thanks to Dr. Amy Erickson, who gifted me the transcript she made of this consistory court case from the Cheshire Record Office. Consistory court means a church court. England has a whole parallel set of courts that are basically morals courts. Fornication, slander, adultery, that kind of stuff. It gets tried in a church court. It's June 1667, and we're in the small village of Holt Chapel near Wrexham, just on the Welsh side of the border. Margaret Royden was in court, where the local minister, John Bowery, accused her of libeling him, of adultery, and of using plans to attempt an abortion. The depositions, the written down testimony, reveal a tangled story, I think, of a relationship gone awry. Margaret was single, and in court records, her father, William, was listed as a gentleman. It seems her mother was dead. It sounds like Margaret may have had a sexual relationship with Bowery starting in late August 1666. By December, Royden suspected the worst and had gone to Ellen Appleton's garden to get a plant known locally as Lurckydish. Now, by the point of research that I got to, I thought I knew a lot about abortion-producing plants. I mean, I had read a lot about this, but I'd never heard the word Lurckydish before. It's a great word. Say it with me. Lurckydish. It's just a great word. Turns out it's an unusual term for pennyroyal, known since antiquity for its abortifacient properties. This image is from the 11th century Old English herbarium. Now, it turns out it's an unusual term in English. It is related to the Welsh word Lurckydish. Sorry, I don't speak Welsh, that's probably a bad pronunciation. Lurckydish means pennyroyal in Welsh. And of course, we are right on the Welsh border here. Lurckydish is exceedingly rare as a word in English texts, however. There are no references to it, for example, in early English books online, the digital treasure trove of 150,000 early English books. Not there at all. But plants that have local names like this, I think, are plants that are used and talked about. They live in everyday experience, not in texts, or not in texts alone. If they didn't matter, they wouldn't have had a word for it. It mattered. The Lurckydish must not have worked, because by Candlemas, that's early February, Royden was getting advice from Ellen Nichols that there was some more Lurckydish growing in the common wood. It must have been miserable. Royden scrabbled around in the snow, but she didn't find any of the plant. I think it's February, there's snow, oh. She also got some germander from John Appleton's garden. I think that's Ellen's father-in-law. Germander is another well-known abortion-inducing plant known for centuries. A month later, she was still looking for more plants. Sometime around then, John Bowery visited Margaret Royden at night, bringing her Savin, yet another well-known abortion-producing plant. I love this. He had tucked it up in the knees of his breeches. Like, I guess the breeches didn't have pockets, but he tucked it in the knees. By now, he was getting worried and was reported to have come to Margaret's window at night, all quiet, to ask if she'd taken the herb, and added that a friend of his had a powder if the Savin hadn't worked. But nothing worked. and the usual machinery of investigating unwed motherhood went into full swing. Again, so the local authorities could collect child support. In England, the Old Poor Law, which is the local welfare system, it's taxes collected in the village and then dispersed to poor people in the village, would provide for an unwed mother. It would pay for the midwife, it would pay for a month of convalescence. But the locals didn't want to spend that money, and so they would try to find the father to collect child support. It's all very local and face-to-face. Margaret had already been examined informally by local women who feared she was pregnant. And then in March, John Bowery, the minister, had Margaret brought before John Sadler, the mayor of Holt. It was a bad move. She swore that Bowery was the father. And Bowery had to post a surety, that's a financial guarantee, so that the ensuing child would not be a charge on the local parish. When she gave birth later that spring, we don't know if it was a boy or a girl, the women in attendance asked her again who the father was. At the height of labor pains, she swore it was Bowery. Now here's the weird twist, a weird twist. Before the birth, Bowery had almost married Margaret Royden. Negotiations were made by Samuel Lloyd, the minister of the nearby parish of Alresford. Bowery was worried about his job. He asked Lloyd if he thought the bishop would let him continue to minister to the parish where he'd been for the past 2 or 3 years. You know, if he got married and basically cleaned up the act. Lloyd thought it might be possible. So arrangements were being made to marry the couple that very night. I have no idea how that would happen. You're supposed to call the banns for 3 weeks, but okay. And Lloyd is kind of going between the two households, sort of negotiating between Bowery and the Royden family. So they're doing this work, and then Bowery's maid, his domestic servant, scuppers the deal, telling him not to do any such thing. So Lloyd gets back from negotiations with the Royden family, and Bowery tells him, "Do you see these 2 eyes in my head? So long as these eyes are in my head, I will never marry her." He'd been negotiating to marry her an hour before. So I'm like, was the maid also in a relationship with Bowery? Like, we don't know. We don't even know her name. But he completely changed his mind in a very short amount of time, suggesting to me that he probably was the father if he was going to get married to her. So the libel case was Bowery's attempt to pull together the shreds of his reputation. He dug up a story about Margaret being seen at moonrise under a crabapple tree with one John Calcott, up to no good. Her father explained that went away, saying Calcott used to come and smoke a pipe with him in the evenings. This is from a 17th century ballad. Smoking a pipe and drinking together was a really common form of male conviviality. Now, once the father said he'd been too fuddled, that is, too drunk, to get together, and send his daughter to Rose Calcott's house, I assume to say, "John, don't come over tonight." And then John was just kindly walking her back home, not making out with her under the apple tree. Bowery also dug up one Charles Bradshaw, an old man described as of no fixed abode or trade, who claimed that Margaret had told him she'd already had 2 shrifts or mistakes. I'll talk more about this later. I think it's an allusion to prior pregnancies, but I'm not sure. So it's obvious there's a lot going on in these records, and they're quite difficult to interpret. The year before, one Thomas Bowery took Margaret Royden to court for a breach of promise case. Like, she'd promised to marry him and then backed out. Was Thomas related to John? I'm betting yes, although hours of time on Ancestry.com have not answered the question for me. We don't know the outcome of the case either. And here's the kicker. The Cheshire Record Office is closed for renovations for 2 years, so I can't even go there and find out more or try to find out more until sometime late in 2026. So be that as it may. But I think even what we have here has a lot to tell us if we listen carefully. First, these depositions reveal just how much knowledge of abortion-producing plants circulated in this tiny village. Everyone recognized and knew what the Lurckydish, Jormander, and Savin meant. Indeed, while some women warned Margaret Royden that Lurckydish shouldn't be taken by pregnant women, another woman told her where to find some growing in the common wood. And I don't think Holt is unusual, except that we can eavesdrop in such detail. Textual evidence suggests that knowledge of abortion-producing plants was abundant in early modern England. What we now call medication abortion was the primary way that women ended pregnancies from antiquity into the late 19th and even the 20th centuries. The same plants had been known for millennia. The big four were savin, rue, tansy, and pennyroyal, but there's dozens more. Scientists today think many of these do in fact have some effects on the female reproductive system. The problem is that the therapeutic window, the space between enough and deadly, is narrow, and it's hard to calculate when you're working with plants that have variable amounts of active ingredients, depending on their age, the site, the harvesting, the preparation, etc. So these are deadly, do not try them. However, early modern textual evidence about abortion knowledge poses an interpretive problem. In humoral medicine, the prevailing understanding of the human body, it was really important that women menstruate regularly. Their bodies were understood as colder and looser and wetter than men's, so they didn't digest their food all the way, didn't cook enough, and the excess that didn't get turned into the humerus, that didn't get cooked, had to be gotten rid of. That was menstruation. You needed to get rid of it or it would do bad things to the body. So there's a lot of medicines that will bring on a late period to get you regular again. And guess what? Many of those medicines are also the same that are recommended to end a pregnancy. The historian John Riddle was among the first to argue that abortion knowledge was widespread in the pre-modern world. But he lumped together all the plants that affected the menstrual cycle and called them all abortion-producing. He assumed abortion knowledge was largely passed woman to woman by word of mouth because it was dangerous. And therefore, in books, abortion-producing plants had to be concealed as amenagogues. That's the name for drugs that provokes menstruation. Me, I'm more of a splitter than a lumper here. I take it seriously that a whole class of drugs existed to help women get their periods back. At the same time, I recognize that many of those drugs might also end a pregnancy. It's a kind of both and situation, I think. It's complicated by the fact it was really hard to determine if a woman were pregnant. No little blue lines at an at-home test. Work by scholars such as Laura Gowing and Barbara Duden has shown us just how unknowable women's reproductive bodies might seem. So there was tremendous ambiguity about missing a period or two, especially when women were often malnourished or breastfeeding, and therefore probably menstruated much less frequently than we are thought to do today. I've argued elsewhere this was a productive ambiguity, where a woman might choose not to think too hard about what was happening, as the same medicine would address both conditions, either a missed period or an early pregnancy. At the same time, the women in Halt had a pretty good idea of what Margaret Royden was looking for. By Candlemas, she'd probably quickened or felt the fetus move within her, which was the moment that changed the ambiguity of a missed period into a likely pregnancy. Of course, she didn't have to tell anybody, but she would have been more certain. Abortion knowledge was abundant in books, both those for scholars and for ordinary women. By the time Royden was in trouble, books were being produced specifically for women readers. Leonard Sowerby's The Ladies' Dispensatory, 1652, listed 121 herbs to provoke the menses and another 45 specifically to provoke abortion. So abortion isn't hiding, it's right there on the page. That's what it says. And most of his instructions were phrased in very basic language, easy for a novice reader. Pennyroyal drunk, gentian root as a suppository, and so on. Much cheaper than Sowerby's book was Sarah Jenner's almanac. Almanacs were among the most common forms of cheap print. They're pamphlets, they're priced at tuppence. 300,000 or more were sold annually in 17th century England. It's like the Old Farmer's Almanac kind of thing. You buy it every year. Jenner's 1659 almanac bluntly offered readers 17 remedies to provoke the menses or evacuate a dead fetus. Some, she says, are available commercially at the apothecary shop. Others could be made at home. Syrup of mugwort or syrup of maidenhair, she tells the reader, could be had in apothecaries. Or at home, you could boil up pennyroyal, balm, margarine, etc., 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 with some sweeten it with a little sugar. If we move from print to manuscript and we look at manuscript remedy books, these are recipes people wrote down for their own domestic use. We also see items referring to the regulation of reproduction. Take, for example, this page. It's a recipe book attributed to one Thomas Sheppey, held by the Folger Library. It dates from 1679, thereabouts. On this page, there's a remedy to bring on the terms, and no, I don't expect you to read the writing. that's the menses, and one to cause deliverance whether the child be quick or dead. That is, to provoke abortion later in pregnancy or to deliver a fetus that had stopped growing, long recognized as a medical emergency. I want to do more work with these recipe books. I don't think they're exactly the same as print. I think I need to push harder and figure out what that might look like. But the overlap between manuscript and print reinforces my point about the extent of abortion-producing plants available to readers in 17th century England and her American colonies. So when these cases went to court, many people would have recognized the significance of the specific herbs mentioned. However difficult to dose correctly, everyone knew these plants. They knew what Savin meant when John Bowery produced it from the knees of his breeches. Savin had a very distinctive smell. It may be that the nasty-smelling pill that Mitchell forced down Warren's throat also contained it. In 1668, Ruth Briggs was tried for infanticide in New Haven in Connecticut. Her neighbor, Mary Russell, told the court that months before, she had recognized the smell of Savin on Briggs's breath, suggesting Briggs had tried unsuccessfully to end the pregnancy. Everyone in court found it completely plausible that Russell could identify Savin by smell. So think of the kind of knowledge you'd have to have that a woman could confidently smell it and think, yep, that's Savin all right, and that everyone in the courtroom would know what that meant and would believe that she could recognize what it smelled like. That's a lot of common knowledge. Briggs was on trial for infanticide, not abortion. Abortion just wasn't the kind of thing that usually made it into a court case. In St. Mary's City and in Holt, it wasn't the headline issue. In Holt, it was really about whether a woman swore her child to the correct father, who was going to pay for it, and if the local minister had been fooling around and lying about it. That's what bothered people. Harvesting abortion-producing plants, while fascinating evidence for me, was only an incidental bit of testimony. In Maryland, the issue was not abortion either. The first item in the indictment of William Mitchell was blasphemy. What seems to have bothered people the most was his flagrant irreligion. He hath not only professed himself to be an atheist, but hath also endeavored to draw others to believe that there is no God. Now, of course, Lord Baltimore had founded Maryland on principles of religious toleration for Catholics, but that has its limits. Mitchell was also accused of murdering his wife whilst at sea, trying to provoke an abortion, and fornication, while Warren was charged with blasphemy and fornication. Mitchell had said some very startling things about religion, which were repeated in court in St. Mary's City. Back in London, he'd referred to Jesus and the Holy Spirit as merely a man and a pigeon who had fooled people for centuries. This statement is so outrageous. Bystanders remembered it for well over a year and repeated it in the Maryland courtroom. It was also alleged that Mitchell never went to church. Never. Mitchell had tried to corrupt Warren with his godless ways as well. When she was very ill, I think it's during the attempted abortion, she called on God for help, and Mitchell scoffed, calling her a fool and asking, had she actually seen this God of hers? Had he actually helped her? For a halfpenny, Mitchell said he himself would answer for all her sins, past and present. And then Warren started to echo Mitchell's unorthodox religious beliefs, and his ability to influence others worried the court. People also remembered and testified to Warren's snarky reply to Mary Clocker that if she were pregnant, it was by the Holy Spirit. After having been abandoned and betrayed by Mitchell, Warren said that, damn her soul, but she would have revenge upon that damned Captain Mitchell. Damn was a much stronger word then than it is now, connoting actual hellfire, and the men who heard her say this were deeply, deeply shocked. Even Mitchell's newest conquest, Joan Toast, had uttered some cynical remarks about religion, saying there was no hell but a bad conscience, no heaven but a good conscience. In court, Susanna Warren pled guilty to fornication. It would have been kind of hard to do anything else, and to blasphemy. She was sentenced to be whipped 39 lashes, but it sounds as though many understood her as the victim, and the number was greatly reduced. More important, the court affirmed that she was not Mitchell's indentured servant, stating clearly that she was free. Mitchell had to pay her legal costs. We don't know what she did next. There's a reference to her a year later still in Maryland, and after that I can't find her. And it's not that uncommon of a name, so we just don't know. Mitchell was a lot more difficult for the court to deal with because he had this powerful protector in this guy, Lord Baltimore. So in the end, they fined him 5,000 pounds of tobacco. Tobacco served as the local currency. But the governor, Lord Baltimore's brother, lowered that to 3,000 pounds and then paid 2,000 of it himself. So all of a sudden, Mitchell's only down to 1,000 pounds. But on the ground in St. Mary's City, they were much more critical. The judge ordered Mitchell and Joan Toast to be separated until they were finally properly married. He also muttered there was much juggling and baseness to the whole business. Mitchell seems to have finally settled down with Toast. He pops up in court records occasionally in the disputes about debt. That's what the court did most days. A 1661 case in Ripple in Worcestershire, it's a tiny little place outside of Tewkesbury, highlights the way that public scandal was a factor in mentions of abortion. Thanks to Professor Laura Gowing for sharing this case with me. Now, you may be thinking, doesn't this woman do her own research? This is the second case she's gotten from somebody else. What? The reason is abortion cases are so incredibly rare in the historical record that, they're very, very unusual. Amy Erickson found the case, the Lurckydish case, well over a decade ago when she was looking for something else. And she said, I knew someone was going to look at this someday. She tucked it in her files. And luckily, I was the person that wanted to see it. So these are really scarce, and this kind of exchange is really kind of common amongst this group of historians. So here's this case. It's pretty short. So Edward Lacey is a laborer, and Elizabeth Inkbarrow, a widow, they find themselves in court. This is super low level. It's like a justice of the peace in what would be his living room. And they were basically there to be told to behave themselves. Lacey had gotten fed up with his marriage, had threatened he would leave his wife with nothing but a bed and the rags on her back. Now, actually, a bed's pretty expensive, but you get the idea. Lacey had been living with Inkbarrow for 5 months. The court record was colorful, using language like lewd carriage and living in whoredom to describe Inkbarrow. Worse yet, they found Savin in her bed, the same exact herb that John Bowery had tucked up in his breeches. Everyone knew what that meant. The court described there is a great suspicion and fear that she hath a design to destroy her child. Worse yet, she'd been seeing some irregular practitioner. She had, and I quote, been known to have tampered with those that pretend to give physic. Boy, would I like to know about that person. That's all we know. For me, the key phrases in the very, very brief court document are things like, her lewd carriage doth give great offense to the neighborhood. A general cause of suspicion. Giving a great cause of scandal and offense to the neighborhood. See, what's really bothering people is the flagrant way these two are carrying on. Implicit is also the threat of financial burden. The court noted that Mrs. Lacey might become a charge to the parish. She might need poor relief if her husband is off with this other woman. And finding Savin in Inkbarrow's bed raised the possibility she might be pregnant and have a bastard child, and then they would need poor relief. Lacey was a laborer. He would have had enough difficulty supporting one family, let alone two. So in all three of these cases, Ripple, Holt, and St. Mary's City, what seems to really matter to the court is a potent combination of scandal and potential bastardy. Babies born to unwed mothers cost parishes money. And for godly communities, it might suggest that this was poor government. No one wanted that. Abortion, I suggest, mattered because it suggested illicit sex, not because it was definitionally wrong. Given the abundance of abortion information available in print, as well as in manuscript remedy books, it's very likely that married women regulated their fertility using abortion. But since they were married, it wasn't an issue. It literally never entered the historical record at all. In another Maryland case, abortion was discussed with reference to a married woman, very unusual. But as we shall see, the court pays absolutely no heed to that, doesn't care. After about a decade in the colony, Elizabeth Robbins and her husband Robert had a falling out in 1657. Robert accused Elizabeth of adultery. Elizabeth was pregnant, and a jury of matrons, a group of worthy married women, was deputed to examine her. They reported she was very ill, as they said, in a very sad condition. She told the women she had twice taken Savin, yes, that again, claiming it was for worms. No one was fooled. A man testified he heard 2 other women talking about how Elizabeth had pretended the Savin was for worms. Evidently, it didn't work, for Elizabeth went on to give birth to a baby, an infant whom she was unwilling to swear was her husband's. Now notice, Elizabeth had done the exact same thing that Susanna Warren had done, attempted an abortion, but she wasn't prosecuted, although the court certainly had rich evidence it could have pursued. This baby had a father, or at least Elizabeth had a husband who was legally the father and had to pay the bills. So I've argued that these cases are not about abortion as a crime per se. They're about illicit sex, scandal, and disorder. They also suggest something about the gendering of abortion. I'll remind you that John Riddle saw abortion as a woman's secret, whispered across the generations. But I'm sure you've already noticed there's a lot of men in my stories. Men who knew about these abortion-producing plants. There's Thomas Sheppey's manuscript remedy book, John Bowery with the Savin tucked up in his breeches, and his friend, probably a man who had a powder if that didn't work. It's William Mitchell who procured the nasty-smelling pill he forced down Susanna Warren's throat. Mitchell also points to female knowledge. He told Warren that if they'd still been in England, he knew an old woman back in Chichester, a little map for us here, that's Chichester, who could have ended the pregnancy and no one the wiser. This allusion to an old woman might hint at the common early modern association between witchcraft and abortion, but that's another story. Church court records, as I've suggested, and criminal court records only rarely included abortion. But here too, the fragmentary incidental evidence suggests that both men and women knew how to end a pregnancy. Although again, attempted abortion is almost never what's really the problem in these cases. Abortion is kind of mentioned, but it's not the real issue. In 1574, the rector of Letting Roden in Essex went to London to buy Savin for his seduced maid so he could cover up the relationship. In Somerset Village, a young man told his pregnant lover to boil up Savin and bear's foot. Again, both old age. He didn't want to have to marry her. In Lichfield, in the Midlands, allusions to abortion emerged in a defamation case in 1632. Anne Harris had gone around trash-talking her neighbor, a single woman named Judith Lane, whom she claimed had been having sex with John Wagstaff. When pregnancy threatened, he had made her go upright again. Such an interesting way to say it. By letting blood from a vein between her big and next toe. Now, bloodletting from the saphenous vein had been a way to produce an abortion, they thought, since antiquity. But the saphenous vein isn't between the 2 toes. It's usually like let at the ankle. And Harris also said Lane had used herbs or potions to try to avoid pregnancy. So the context for the episode when Mitchell forces a nasty pill down Susanna Warren's throat is a rich one. Abortion knowledge could be found in books, almanacs, recipe books, and everyday conversations. Men as well as women knew how to end a pregnancy. Various cases from church or criminal courts also indicate that ending a pregnancy could be an act of desperation or of domination. In a number of these tales, it's a man who procures the medicine, like Mitchell, or in the case of Wagstaff, did the bloodletting. The reproductive justice movement of our own day has critiqued the model of choice that underlay Roe v. Wade, reminding us that many women do not have the luxury of choice. Much the same can be said for many, but far from all, of these early modern episodes. In conclusion, I wanted to return to the problem of the use of the Mitchell case in the Dobbs decision. Yes, it's based on Delapen's book, yes. But it's also an epistemological problem, a problem of how we know what we know. The search for legal precedent, I think, is in some ways perpendicular to historical scholarship. Case law is based on precedent, earlier examples that look like the case at hand. It's fundamentally a search for similarity. But that quest for similarity may obscure what it is that we actually need to see. In this instance, the kind of quest has presumed that abortion meant the same thing over centuries. But I don't think that's the case. Today, anti-abortion campaigners emphasize the fetus, or what they call the unborn child. But in these early modern stories, the fetus is invisible. No one is concerned about it. The meanings of the human body are deeply changeable. And perhaps pregnancy is especially difficult for us to reimagine, because we've grown up with fetal imaging, which grants a form of identity to a fetus very early. It's different in the pre-modern world. The Italian classicist Enzo Nardi perhaps put it best. He noted that in antiquity, a pregnancy was not imagined as a future baby. It was, as he poetically put it, but a hope. Perhaps this insubstantiality, this not quite a being, helps us to understand the language allegedly used by Margaret Royden, that she'd had 2 previous shrifts. The word meant penance or confession, but it might also mean a revelation of something private or secret. Maybe that's what she was hinting at, that these shrifts revealed earlier what? Pregnancies? They were indications of illicit sex without quite being pregnancy yet? There was something else perhaps, a potential, a fear, but not a fetus or an embryo in our sense of the words. So I've argued that in early modern England, abortion was simply not understood as the kind of misdeed that were worth prosecuting, unless it were part of a larger array of bad behavior. Women regulated their fertility using plants. Many people knew about it and recognized these plants. Abortion was only a problem when it served as a pointer to illicit sex, with a threat of bastardy, and/or when it was associated with local scandal, disorder, or social strife. It was clear, for example, that William Mitchell was the father of Susanna Warren's child, although it was so short-lived it did not pose a financial burden on the community. It was only when Mitchell started another extramarital relationship that local arrest about his bad behavior seems to have actually catalyzed a court case. Equally, the problem in Holt was not the support that we needed for Margaret Royden's baby, but the scandal caused by the fact she'd sworn it to the minister, and a lot of people believed her. So too in Ripple, the double threat of the cost of bastardy and the public spectacle of an Edward Lacey happily abandoning his wife for the bed of Elizabeth Inkbarrow was just too much. Excuse me. When we look at the bigger picture, people in early modern England and its American colonies did not consider abortion to be definitionally wrong or a criminal offense. It is only by misreading the Mitchell case that it can bear the interpretive weight demanded by Dobbs. Abortion has long been woven into American history. Thank you. And I'm happy to either have questions about what I talked about tonight or about the larger project.
Yeah, I just want to ask, why there's a few cases of documented evidence of abortions throughout history? Like, why is it rarely talked about? Like, it seems like they turn a blind eye to it.
Exactly. Thank you. That is exactly the case. What I argue is that even if it's technically illegal or not, or forbidden in some way, or it's a sin, in the individual case, people see a woman and they understand her circumstance and they look the other way. They just think, oh, well, she needs this. They prioritize her needs over the abstract of the law or the church ruling. So I just think people knew and they just pretended they didn't see what was happening because it didn't really matter to them. It's only when this other stuff happens. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not sure if it's going to be a question or a statement, but I noticed how now we look at abortion and we see how it's like good for women to have that choice. But back then, even though they had that choice, it was still patriarchy imposing that, because in the story that you gave us, it was the man who didn't want to marry her and didn't want that child. So even if it's like the illusion of choice, patriarchy might still be like cornering that.
Absolutely, and that's why I found reproductive justice to be such a great analytic, because many women don't have that luxury of choice. Now, there are women who did have choices and made them, you know, who like understood the consequences of them. I'm thinking of this German woman, a servant, who had had sex with like 10 different guys in a short amount of time, or it wasn't 10, but multiple guys. And like, in some senses, she understood the potential consequences and took plants and et cetera. But there are a lot of darker stories in the book also, where it's not about a woman's individual choice. And so I think it's really important that we have a broader framework for understanding reproductive rights. So thank you.
During your lecture, you began by commenting how there's records under renovation and then you won't know for certain until the year of 2026. What are you trying to hope to find when you dive into these records? Any more evidence, or is there certain specific cases you're looking out for?
Great question. It's almost two things, because this is the specific case that happened in Ripple. It's the Margaret Royd and John Bowery story. And so when you get these cases, it doesn't narrate it like a story like I've told it to you. You have a series of depositions, and people say things that often cross-cut one another, and it can take a long time and a lot of analysis to kind of piece it together, and then you realize, oh wait, but he's her father-in-law. Why is he saying that? Like, it doesn't come labeled. So some of it is just any records of these people would help me. But more important, I'm really interested in that breach of promise case the year before, that Margaret Royden was in this breach of promise case with someone named Bowery who wasn't the minister. So I think there's a backstory there of, I think this is in part a story about village rivalries. Because when you look at the depositions and you like look at them again and again, you realize there's this sort of like the for the minister contingent and the anti the minister contingent. And the anti the minister contingent is a lot bigger and more powerful. So I really think it's about ongoing tensions in the village that are expressed through this case. So I want to see what else I can find, because it's this, I love this kind of interpretation. You have little fragments and you have to kind of keep rearranging them like a jigsaw puzzle until they begin to make a little bit of sense to you. So I'm hoping there'll be a few more jigsaw puzzle pieces in the Cheshire Record Office that might offer me some insight. We'll see.
Hi. I was curious if you could speak to the intersectionality for African American women in like the Deep South, and what role, if any, abortion played for them.
Oh, how long do you have? That is an incredibly rich and powerful story. One of the things that I talk about in the book is the way in which the European exploration of the New World and then enslavement of Africans ends up bringing three different plant cultures together, because there's indigenous Americans who know about plants that will alter fertility. There's Africans who bring very rich knowledge, and there's Europeans. So in a way, if you're in America, like, there's way more knowledge about multiple kinds of plants. In the American South in particular, we see the enduring power of African knowledge, because enslaved people in antebellum America, women might chew on cotton root. Now, cotton root, it's the same plant that they're hoeing and weeding and doing backbreaking labor with during the day. It turns out from African knowledge, they knew that the root could disrupt fertility. And so there's evidence in the WPA narratives of enslaved people's lives many decades later, that they would chew cotton root. They had to make sure that nobody saw them, none of the white people saw them doing it. And they even would grow a little tiny plant of it underneath their cabin so they would have access to this thing. So that to me is just an amazing story of incredible irony. The same plant that's enriching their master by day is helping them not enrich the master at night by bearing more children who would be enslaved. Like, that's such a, like, you couldn't write that, right? It's such a rich irony. But I think that for America, given the complexities of the history of enslaved people, you can't talk about abortion without talking about race. I think that is always a figure in the story. It may not be in the words, but it's in the subtext. And so I didn't know when I started writing those parts of the book how significant that would be, but I think
like I said, you can't think about abortion without thinking about race. Really, really significant for America.
You mentioned in your talk that like because a lot of these like early abortion methods were like herbal and you had to go out and actually pick up the plant in order to take it, that it's like really difficult to dose, and sometimes there can be like potentially fatal consequences. So to what extent were those fatal consequences sort of like advertised in these almanacs and in like the literature at the time, and how much of it was just like conventional wisdom?
It's not advertised at all. In terms of the deadliness, you start seeing stuff in medical journals in the early 20th century. Women are dying of pennyroyal poisoning in the 1930s. It's terrible, like the 1930s. What you see instead is that dosing's really hard and efficacy's uncertain. And so sometimes when a woman ends up in court, tragically sometimes it's for infanticide. It's like the Ruth Briggs case. What emerges in court is a narrative of she tried this plant, and then she tried that plant, and then she tried this other plant, and none of them worked. So mostly when we find that out, it's because it didn't work. The ones that were successful, we'll never know because they didn't write it down. The women who died, tragically, we'll probably never know either because that wasn't something, they don't have like death certificates with cause of death in the 1600s, usually. And it's not clear that anybody would have known what it was. So it's invisible in the record. And I've never seen anybody talking about it, like in a manuscript remedy book, like don't take this too often. Like I just don't see that. But we know from the record, by the early 19th century, women in Victorian Britain, well, mid-19th century, are starting to take arsenic because arsenic is newly available as a chemical preparation. It's sold as rat killer. And of course, it kills women too. And so you see that in the newspapers. So there's moments when you see the kind of dangers, but you don't see it that often.
Why was abortion in less of like a religious aspect back then when religion was more of a part of like law and society than it is like how it's more religious now?
That is such a rich question. Thank you. Now, the Christian church, okay, so in antiquity, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, abortion is not really a problem. That's an overgeneralization, really not. Christianity begins to make it an issue because it's quite focused on sexuality. So it's bad, it's a sin. They argue about like, well, like how soon, like what counts, like how can you, like, is it when life begins? No, it's about ensoulment. Well, how can you tell ensoulment? Like how would you know that that's the moment of ensoulment? By the high Middle Ages, like the 1100s, they finally create a proxy for ensoulment. They decide it's quickening. Like when a woman actually feels the fetus move, that must be that like now it has a soul. And so after that, abortion's a big no. Before that, it's not a good thing, but they're not really worried about it. And so what you see is this is the kind of time when it's on the books as a sin, but in reality, it doesn't seem to bother people very much. It's almost very rarely ends up in court. And when it does, it's incidental. It's like the vicar who goes to London from Essex to get Savin because he's trying to cover up that he's having an illicit affair with his maidservant. So it's really the maidservant part that's the problem. So you only see it sort of in the interstices of other things. The situation we're in now in America, that is a result of very specific kind of evangelical activities being hijacked by conservative political interests. And I don't talk about that like that's after 1973. But that is the result of a concerted political effort to make abortion this deeply religious issue that frankly it wasn't before. Now, the Catholic Church long inveighed against abortion from 1869, but only from 1869 on. They said abortion is a sin no matter when. Like from the moment of conception, it's a life, all of that really starts in 1869. But what we see is that when the Pope says that, like American Catholic newspapers don't say anything. American Catholic bishops don't stand up and say, this is really important. It's as if it happens, but it doesn't have the same kind of bite, if you know what I mean. And in Baltimore, that has a large Catholic population, relatively speaking, There's tons of abortion. So I really think the way things are cast now, with the focus on the fetus and the deeply religious thing, is a really recent development. And it's important for us to understand that it has not always been this. This is the result of specific circumstances. Thank you.
Any more questions? This will be, unless there's more, this will be our last one, and then we have a reception outside with lots of cookies and fruit, and you can talk to the speaker.
Thank you very much for your talk, Dr. Fissel. I have a question for you. What do you foresee? The reinstatement of Roe v. Wade? If so, when? And how will we actually push back? And
well, you know, historians hate to predict the future. We're always like, nope, that's not our business. But I remain optimistic. Maybe I remain optimistic because it's easier to get out of bed in the morning. But I think such a huge majority of Americans think abortion is a matter between the pregnant person and their healthcare provider. Overwhelmingly large numbers of Americans think that I do believe the pendulum is going to swing back. And when I look in the historical record, what I see is these relatively brief periods of frenzy, of moral panic about abortion. And then I would say common sense, people might say other things, reasserts itself. And the kind of fire burns out. I don't think that Roe v. Wade, given the choice model, is going to be quite the right model in future. I think we need legislation, because legislation is a stronger means at our current moment. I don't know how it's going to happen, but when I see the weight of numbers, I also see us in the bigger world. Over the past 30 years, 60 nations have liberalized their abortion laws. 4 nations have rolled back the other way, including us. So are we going to be on the side of the 60 or the 4? What do you think? You know, I think like history suggests that this will be reversed. So I remain optimistic. I do all the things that a woman like me would do to try to help that change happen, and I think we all have to fight, but I don't quite see exactly how that's going to happen. But I do believe it's going to happen.
You said that people used to turn a blind eye to kind of abortion of like, oh yeah, like women just needed it, and so people just kind of let her be and stuff like that. Was the change in worrying about women's abortion more so like a gender-based change or religious-based change? Like I know you kind of said in her question over there that, you know, there like religion kind of, it was a catalyst but also wasn't really a catalyst. So like what was kind of the leading factor in people then starting to worry about it again?
Great question. In America, it's often, well, the first wave of anti-abortion stuff in America is in the 1850s, 60s, 70s. And it's often linked to doctors, men, who thought that they needed a kind of high moral ground. Medicine in the middle of 19th century America was like a total free-for-all. You could practice pretty much no matter what. Like, you know, the whole structure we have today of medical school and internship and residency and licensing exams, almost none of that existed. There were medical schools, but you could just hang out a shingle. And so the guys who went to the medical schools were pretty annoyed. They'd put all that time and effort into medical school. And they're the ones who started the anti-abortion legal campaigns. And so that, I think, but is also at another level, it's backlash. Because when's the first American feminist movement? That very time. You know, Seneca Falls, I don't need to tell you people, it's like right here. Susan B. Anthony. The first wave feminism is something that these doctors hate. They hate women doctors. They're really threatened by that. And so I think it's a combination of like this professional initiative, but also it's the same story. It's gender backlash yet again. And I see that in like Renaissance Germany. It's very often this wave of legislation and of panic really is caused by women assuming some new rights. So this very last bit that we're in now, I think is also gender backlash. I think we're looking at the results of third wave feminism, basically. But it has this other evangelical religious overlay that is quite unusual. Thanks.